Exploitation for Week 17. I'm Jason Gilba, JGilba11. With me is Russell Clay at Russell J. Clay. It's here. It's a daunting process. It's a grind of a season, but we're at Week 17, and it's just your car's stuck in the mud, and you're just trying to push it out at this point.
Yeah, your best chance at having a good week was Week 16. A lot of teams still playing for it. Week 17, a lot of things are locked up. We're going to have kind of a different format today. But, I still think there's some matchups to exploit. I still think there's some ways we can go about this. But, with salary exploitation, it's not going to be about salaries this week. I mean, if you've ever played preseason, it's more about snaps this week. It really is. And what games are going to actually be playing hard. I mean, not playing hard. All of the guys are playing hard to differing degrees, but just some of these matchups are much more important than others. There's going to be some wonky results because some teams have already gone fishing, and it's just going to be a wild week. So not good for DFS, but good for tournaments, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is only, Monday, 5 o'clock. So we're looking kind of at some pricing of guys that with some possible chances to come alive this week, some guys that won't. So basically, I mean, take it with a little bit of, a grain of salt here because, things come Wednesday, Thursday could shift, completely what we say.
Absolutely. I guess we can get into quarterbacks here. First one I'm looking at on DraftKings is Blake Bortles at 5,600. Coming off that nice performance last week, caught a receiving touchdown. Obviously, just a ridiculous season. I'm not looking at him on FanDuel. 7,600 there is not something I'm necessarily interested in, but I do still think you can go back to that stack with Allen Robinson. With Marquise Lee. I mean, I think that's a trio I'm willing to go, to the mat with if I were a high school wrestler. There's no running game to speak of. I mean, Chris Ivory's been doing okay, but he's always getting banged up. This Colts team doesn't really have much to play for. I think this could be a great correlation game, and if you want to go Bortles instead of Luck with sort of a game stack here, I think certainly viable.
Yeah, I do too. I like Bortles quite a bit this week. I mean, I think because FanDuel, Russell Wilson's the same exact price of Blake Bortles, and still Seahawks battling for some playoff position going up against San Francisco. I'd kind of rather use Wilson there.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair call, especially with some of his stacking options. Now, I'm not going to get too excited about Paul Richardson, but I'm probably going to get pretty excited about Paul Richardson. Unfortunate injury to Tyler Lockett. Again, he was really coming on in the second half. But Paul Richardson, former second-round pick from that vaunted 2014 draft class, super speedster. At least he was, 2 major injuries ago. True 4.3 speed. If he can, they're going to be sending him deep. I know this is a wide receiver and not a quarterback, but, losing Tyler Lockett might not necessarily be as big of a problem for Wilson with some of their depth they have.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And, I mean, looking at the quarterback position this week, I think we can honestly say Aaron Rodgers is just going to be by far the top option because there's something to play for. He's, playing out of his mind right now. But another guy, I mean, Jameis Winston on DK 6,100, they're playing for something. They got to win to even give themselves a shot. I think he's another guy you can kind of compare in terms of Bortles. Winston's a better play on DK at that price compared to his FanDuel price tag.
I just wonder how much Carolina will care. This seems like a game, and there's always that one game every year where the playoff team is gunning for it and they play just a bad team, but the bad team just goes, nope, not today. And they just ruin their playoff hopes, even though there's nothing to play for. Like, I have a strong feeling that this might be that game. Like, they just crush them. But, I do love that price. I think, if everything does go according to plan, how the season has played out, Winston's certainly a viable option at that price.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anyone else really catch your eye at quarterback?
I mean, I want to say Stafford, that Stafford,
6K.
that Stafford, Tate stack. I mean, you can always go with Eli and Odell Beckham kind of fighting for that 2 seed a little bit here. But Yeah, mostly, I think it's about who to avoid than who to actually roster this week at quarterback, you know?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a couple of situations where we could see Ben Roethlisberger sitting for rest, and you just got a lot of guys in playoff spots where they may play 2 to 3 quarters.
Yeah, like you're not playing Philip Rivers. No thanks on Kirk Cousins in an important game. You know, even Andrew Luck against this Jags secondary is kind of scary, you know?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, outside of that, though, it seems to be pretty funneled down at the quarterback position.
Yeah,
So,
certainly.
looking at running backs, and I think first one we should probably talk about here is early indications point towards Le'Veon Bell at least being very limited to just being out this week, and that would put D'Angelo Williams in a similar spot to where we played him the first couple of weeks.
If Le'Veon Bell is even reported to be limited, we go 100% D'Angelo Williams at 5,500 on DK. Yeah, and I believe you said he's min on
He's the
FanDuel.
same price as Roberto Aguayo.
You have to go 100% D'Angelo Williams. That's not an option, right? You just have to.
I mean, against this Browns defense, he's going to get a full workload. Yeah, I don't see why not with those prices.
You have to go 100% D'Angelo, even with the injury risk of all running backs. 100%. Just do it. Mix up the high end options you're paying up for because that is easy value. We've been struggling for running back value all season, it seems. And, when you get something like that, you don't worry about it. Again, there's no Chargers running backs that you need to worry about. Like Alex Collins, like I just don't want to do any of this malarkey. I don't want to do Jaquiz Rogers. So Tevin Coleman, I think we should have a conversation about. Is he the least matchup dependent player in fantasy football? Like it just doesn't. His matchup doesn't matter. He could have a terrible game against an easy run D, and then he could do what he did last week against Carolina's still good run D. 9 carries
Well,
for 90 yards and a touchdown.
yeah, I mean, well, yeah, you look at that, but I mean, what? That was a 55-yard touchdown that he broke off or something
Yeah,
like that. So, I
and he
mean,
got a 40-yard reception the play before too. So he had
yeah.
90 yards in one drive.
So, I mean, yeah, it comes on a lot of big plays with Coleman. But I think this is a week where you can look at him in tournaments on both
Mhm.
sides, because I do think I like Freeman and I like Coleman this week against New Orleans. I'm less off the passing game because I think Atlanta's just going to kind of go that route against New Orleans. So I think they're great mid-level plays because I think a lot of people will kind of pay up for the Johnson, McCoy options. And then, if Williams is playing, he's just going to be that chalk value.
Yeah, and one guy that isn't necessarily a value, but I think, we would avoid this Minnesota defense early in the year. 6,800 for Jordan Howard. I actually think that's a pretty good deal. The dude has just been awesome. Vikings D has really been exposed over the last month with all the injuries. Not saying it's their fault, but just the way the season's turned out, they've really been exposed. I wouldn't be afraid to go against Jordan Howard, even though he is playing, or going with Jordan Howard, even though he is playing, Minnesota.
How do you feel about Bilal Powell this week? Obviously, a letdown against the Patriots, a Buffalo run defense that's really struggled. I mean, pretty cheap on both sides, and obviously gets work on the ground and into the passing game.
Again, I wasn't afraid to play Powell last week. It obviously didn't work out because the Jets lost 42-3. You'd think some of that game flow at the end would have worked in his direction, but um, Buffalo's given up 200 rushing yard games this year, or two or three, two to JJ and one to Le'Veon Bell, I think is what it was. Do I think Bilal Powell has that type of upside? No way, but at 6,500, I'm certainly willing to gamble with him again. 2 good weeks, bad regression week against the tough defense. I think we're going to see, back to normal 20 to 25 DK points from him. And I think he's viable on FanDuel. I know that sounds weird, but I'm not afraid to go with Powell again this week.
No, I don't think I'm not either. I mean, you're looking at that ownership. Possibly, it wasn't that high last week, but I think this week it's going to be even lower. I think single digits.
Certainly agree.
So, um, running backs here. I mean, LeGarrette Blount. He's a guy I'm kind of intrigued with, but I'm kind of afraid to just go with New England in general this week.
It's tough. You never know what they're gonna do. It could be a Michael Floyd 10 target game for all we know. But like, uh, in terms of process, in terms of matchup itself, I like it. I just worry about exposure because we don't know how many touches he's gonna get.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, really, you take away, 1 or 2 touchdowns last week. He wasn't really involved all that often. It was really a split share backfield.
Mark Ingram is someone that I think is pretty fun. Really up and down, but against this Falcons team at 5,600, obviously getting the goal line carries after he threw a temper tantrum 2 weeks ago. Maybe that continues towards the end of the year. 5,600 against the guy that's got, 3 or 4 25-plus point games in an optimal matchup. I think that's an interesting way to go.
Yeah, I think so too. Anyone else you really want to talk about?
No, not especially. I mean, again, you guys got to wait till later in the week and see what opens up in that 4K to 3,500 range. It's gonna get ugly. I mean, if TJ Eldon's out this week, maybe look at Chris Ivory, but other than that, not much.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Wide receivers, and there's a fair amount of cheap options that are in games that matter, and kind of maybe games that matter to the team, but also games that matter personally. Steve Smith, let's just jump out and talk about him.
100,000% Steve Smith. We're all in. Nothing about the Bengals secondary is going to keep Steve Smith from getting 100 receiving yards this week, and potentially 2 touchdowns. And I'm being a little facetious here, but
you're not.
But I'm not. This is the willpower of this man to do things is so strong that it's been happening for 10 years now. Like, can we really ignore it at this point? Steve Smith narrative games are real. They're real. And worst case scenario, I mean, he gets 8 catches for 80 yards. Yeah. Like, that's his floor for me this week. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I just don't see him potentially retiring on like a 3 for 40, and no touchdown game. It's going to be in the game plan. It's just all in. All in.
I like him a lot this week and on both sides. And I think another guy in that same price range is Golden Tate. Just 5,700 on, FanDuel. I think if you want to game stack a game that matters, this is the one to do it. And I think that's pretty obvious. I mean, at least how I look here early on in the week.
Yeah, he's 6,600 on DK, but I don't even care. Yeah, it's a great matchup. Without Riddick, I mean, it's just, very easy to envision seeing him get 10 to 12 targets like he has each of the last 3 weeks. So I'm all in.
Yeah, I mean, I am too. And I mean, you're playing Rodgers and Nelson, you throwing Tate with them. It just seems to be that's how my line of construction is going.
Certainly. Another guy I think is really interesting is Eli Rogers. I know Roethlisberger's going to be out for the most part, but even with a backup quarterback against this Browns secondary, I think we can really look at Eli Rogers. Obviously, over 70 yards in each of the last 2 games, got that receiving touchdown 2 games ago. There just aren't that many weapons there. If they're resting Bell, that's a super good thing for Eli because he mans the slot most of the time. So, that could be a big boon for value in week 17.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is a lot of cheap wide receivers the more I'm going through it. Sterling Shepard's a guy I'm interested in. 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Targets have been there as well. With a lot of the focus being on OBJ, I still think Shepard's going to get his. This is a pass-heavy offense.
Paul Richardson is such a good play. Are
you still on Paul Richardson? I'm over here talking about Sterling Shepard, and you're talking about Paul Richardson.
I know you're talking about Sterling Shepard. I know you are, and I wanted to let you finish, but I'm rude, and I have things that I need to shout over you while you're talking.
Yeah, well, go for it. This is your show, so what the hell? Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to shut up for 5 minutes.
I already talked about him. I just wanted to interrupt you and say things. So
You're
Um,
welcome. Go ahead. Whatever.
back to Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard's a really good play.
Oh, thank you. I
Um,
was talking about him.
oh, you were? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to you. No, what were you going to say about Shepard? Go ahead.
Well, I said it.
Yeah, well, say it again.
Relatively cheap. This is a game that matters. I know the Giants have clinched, but there's still, playoff implications in terms of seeding on the line in this one. And I just think overall, OBJ saw 20 targets last week. And obviously, Shepard still got a good amount of looks his way. I think you can rely on about, 7 to 10 targets again this week for him in a better matchup because obviously Josh Norman's the guy who you expect to shadow OBJ, but that's always been kind of up in the air. I think in that price range, I think he's going to probably be the less popular option out of the guys that we've mentioned.
I think I agree. And Sterling Shepard been one of the better rookies. I mean, without Michael Thomas, I'd say Shepard's right in there for top rookie of the year, for wide receivers. But other than that, I mean, I think that's a nice range for him in that type of game. They do go to Victor Cruz here and there, but overall, Shepard's a nice piece.
Yeah.
Marquise Lee in that range, I really like. JJ Nelson, I don't see how we can deny him at this point. I know, obviously small samples and scoring touchdowns on big plays. That's the type of player he is. And throughout his career, much like Ted Ginn, there's going to be stretches where, he goes 5 weeks without doing anything. But there's also going to be these stretches where he's flaming hot. He's getting a lot of targets, with some of the injuries, and he's supplanted John Brown. Like, I know that's obvious to say at this point, but it's still rather shocking when you go into the week and you're like, yeah, he really has taken over John Brown as that second guy in the receiving game. So it seems that they've gone away from Gresham after that short stint. Nelson really owning the secondaries right now. He crushed Richard Sherman last week. So I think we just continue to fire away. I don't know.
I'm looking at that Cardinals team, and I just think I don't care that the game doesn't mean anything. That team's still going to go up and probably hang 30-plus points. I just see that happening. It just seems to be that's the case. I think they're one of the more steadier, doesn't matter teams in the NFL.
And, Tavon Austin kind of had that 30-yard rushing touchdown last week, bailed out what was another – this Rams team is just two catches on 7 targets. Tough to want to play a guy like that, but at 4,300 against this Cardinals secondary that struggled against the jitterbugs of late, I'm in.
Yeah, I am too. We'll talk about one more guy here before we head on to tight end. Allen Robinson, still cheap, still very usable here.
Still very good. Allen Robinson was never not good. That never, ever happened. It's just a bad year, really tough schedule. Great player facing a bad secondary. Let's do it.
I mean, I saw that they moved him around a lot more, whereas, earlier in the season, he was pretty stagnant on his side, and I think that was kind of easy to, game plan against.
He was also making ridiculous catches again. So that's a good sign. If you missed
those, yes, fine.
those are a good sign as well.
Yeah.
Tight end, I guess the first guy we'll bring up here, Kobe Fleener, dead. He was dead 5 weeks ago. Some of us may have taken chances on him in our fantasy championships. We got bailed out by Travis Kelce, but that doesn't excuse, and we should learn from this, Russell. No more Kobe Fleener. That said, the guy right next to him, Jared Cook, becoming a pretty pivotal part of this Lions or this Packers offense, not necessarily in week-to-week stats, but in how they use him, how they single him up down the field, his speed, just the way they line him up, the types of snaps they give him. Really important player for that team going down the stretch. I know that sounds dumb, but it's true. They've turned things on since he got back. I think he's a really high upside play at 31.
I do too. He's a great punt-ish GPP play this week. And I just look here and I don't think I'm going to be paying up a tight end at all. I don't see a real need to. Zach Ertz, I feel like, is a guy who, was coming off.
Zach Ertz loves week 17.
He loves,
Loves week 17.
doesn't like week 16, but loves week 17.
Loves it. No, he loves end of the season when there's nothing to play for. Just drinks it up.
Do you like him this week? I mean, great matchup.
Yeah, it's going to happen. I mean, he's going to get 17 targets, 13 catches, 47 yards, and a 2-point conversion. And that's going to be Zach Ertz for you. So
I feel like maybe this is too early to say, but I feel like we're just going to be looking at like guys like Charles Clay, Dennis Pitta, and like names like those to kind of throw as GPP darts because I can't see myself using most of these guys.
I'm in on Cook as a GPP flyer. I don't love cash. There are no cash game tight ends at this point in the season. There just aren't.
No, especially with how this year's gone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Travis Kelce is tremendous, but he only saw 5 targets the game before. I mean, with Macklin back, it's tough to say what you're going to get there. So, yeah, just tough overall. Again, we mentioned some names. Antonio Gates still chasing that touchdown record. Obviously had 13 targets last week, someone to maybe look for. But other than that, pretty meh.
Yeah, it really is. And as always, it just seems to be like, DK has a much, much more lower pricing on tight ends than FanDuel does, especially this week, because you look at Jimmy Graham, Delaney Walker, those names, I mean, Kyle Rudolph, Zach Ertz, those are all priced up quite a bit on FanDuel. DraftKings, they're priced down like 3s, low 4s.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something to consider. I think there's going to be a clear kind of, distance between what plays are better on FanDuel than DraftKings.
Certainly with you there. In terms of defenses, Carlos Hyde out for the season. I think we fire away with the Seahawks in cash. I'm not looking at – we could look at the Broncos, but Raiders still have the imprint of a good team, and sometimes that can sustain itself for a few weeks without the quarterback. I think the running game has still been really solid. So I'm not necessarily looking to pay up for this Broncos team. I mean, geez, the Bills and Jets game is just a mess. In terms of that's just a mess. Like the Bills just throw up on every game, and it just becomes this rainbow of trash defense and big plays and crap. So I don't trust them either, even without Bryce Petty in there. I don't know, man. It's ugly. The Rams always play Carson Palmer tough at home, but this team just doesn't seem to have any juice left. They've seemingly given up on the season, so I wouldn't even trust them in this spot, honestly.
No, I wouldn't either. I mean, for me, I like the Patriots because they're priced back down again. They're about $700-800 cheaper than the Seahawks this week on both sides.
Yeah.
And just New England's going to be out there game planning for Jay Ajayi, their best player. You can take away Jarvis Landry, Devontae Parker with some of those guys in that secondary. I just think New England's, the way their defense is playing of late, they've really turned it on over the last 5 to 6 weeks. And this is a week where they still need to kind of secure that number 1 spot.
Yeah, I'm with you. Again, this is where we wait, especially with defenses, because we just don't know what some of these teams are going to look like yet. We really don't. So, I mean, I know you guys are looking for us for early week, stuff for roster construction, but I would really highly suggest not building your lineups before Saturday night this week is what I would really say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're just more kind of outlining the prices of guys that we're possibly going to be on for cheap guys. I think wide receivers pretty much that seems to be the most clear-cut position so far this week.
Absolutely.
You can tell by our in-depth analysis and wide receiver time. So
Paul Richardson.
Any parting words for the last salary exploitation of the year here?
It's been fun. This was my favorite article of the year. I love doing this one. It's fun to get out ahead and sort of predict early on in the week what's going to happen. So I really, really enjoyed this and hope you guys did too.
Yeah, I mean, I did somewhat. So,
Yeah, sometime.
actually, you know what, Russ? It's not our last exploitation of the year. We still have 2 more weeks, so I take that back.
Regular season.
Regular season, yeah. So,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
If you want to check out Russ's article on just a debacle of Week 17 nonsense that's about to unleash, you can head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com, check that out. Be sure to check out the rest of our Week 17 content that will be coming out. And if you like what we're doing on these pods or what we've been doing on these pods for this season, give us a thumbs up and a subscribe. So we'll catch you guys next week.